All right, viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good day and welcome to another episode of Global Arena on my YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I'm your host, Umar Isa Dandagu. I'm going to start my introduction by playing a clip of one of the world's most popular politicians. And I want you, my viewers, to observe an egregious grammatical mistake that this native speaker of English makes here. Let's have a listen to this guy.
Person, you shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat.
All right. Later, together with my guest, we will analyze this grammatical mistake that this guy has made. My guest today, is not former and likely future president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, which we have just heard, or whose clip we have just heard. I just hope one day I'll be able to host him on my show physically, hopefully. But the guy joining me right now is someone who gets seriously angry, frustrated, exasperated even, when someone uses a terribly bad grammar. I mean, why? He's a native speaker, and those guys are also native speakers. Jeffrey Barg, popularly known in the United States of America and beyond as quote-unquote the angry grammarian, has written tons of columns, articles about the English language and how people, especially the native speakers, at least in his own case, break some of the grammatical rules governing the English language. Jeffrey Barg has recently produced a musical, meaning a type of stage drama that involves singing and dancing, and there he and his crew have addressed some of these issues he has been writing about. So the baffling question surrounding the minds of learners of the English language is, do the native speakers of English make grammatical mistakes when speaking or writing? If yes, is that intentional? Well, Jeffrey Barg joins me now from the cloudy city of Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, the state of Pennsylvania, in the northeastern part of the United States of America. Thank you very much, Jeffrey Barg, for being on the show of Global Arena. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's kick off. Before we dive deeply into the crux of the conversation, let's get to know a little bit about yourself. Who is Jeffrey Barg, the angry grammarian?
I am, I started out my career as a copy editor, working for a newspaper, being the last guy to read every article before it went to print. And I was interested in language before then, and that made me fanatical about it, just being the last stop before our publication would reach, thousands of readers. And so I worked for many years as a copy editor, learned the intricacies of the language in and out, and through doing that decided that I eventually wanted to write a column about language and about grammar, because I had seen it used and abused in so many ways. And I think it's a really interesting and really fun topic. And so I started writing. It was back in 2007, I think, when I first started the column, and have done it off and on for years since then.
Did you study English language at university, at a degree level, for example? Because I was going through your biography, and I read that you read something like what do you call it? Not architecture, planning, something like that, civil engineer, or something like that.
Yeah, I studied a lot of things. English was not my major in university. I focused on history, actually, when I was an undergraduate, U.S. American history, and then later studied, as you mentioned, urban planning, so how cities came to be. And but English and writing have always just been passions of mine. And learning history is a really great training for anybody who wants to become a journalist, because you have to know if you're reporting on things that are happening now, you have to know how they got that way. And so I learned history, became a journalist. I studied urban planning to get more into cities, which is where I have made my career. And but then, sort of learning the ins and outs of the language in particular has just been something that I've studied on my own.
All right. So English language, apart from being your native language, you sort of independently, outside of the university circle, studied it. So someone would say, how do you get the audacity to say this person has destroyed one grammatical rule or the other?
The funny thing about rules is that they exist to help make the things that we say more understandable. They exist so that we can, in my view, say what we're trying to say as precisely and as concisely as possible. I think that's what's great about grammar. That's what's great about language, is that when we use it correctly, we say things much more precisely. It helps us say exactly what we want to say, and we say them more concisely. We don't repeat ourselves, as I'm doing right now, actually. You don't want to waste people's time. And so if you can say things concisely, you're not wasting people's time, and you can use language more efficiently.
All right. How did you get the name The Angry Grammarian? Someone nicknamed you, or you just nicknamed yourself?
I nicknamed myself. I knew that I wanted to write a column about grammar, and I thought, well, but it can't just be about grammar. Like, it has to have some sort of angle or some sort of hook. And I was thinking, well, the voice that I want to write in, it's somebody who's interested in grammar, but he's not just interested in it, he's angry about it. So what would that be called? Oh, how about just The Angry Grammarian? And I said that to a couple of colleagues, and they're like, oh yeah, that works. That's good. We like that. And so the name stuck.
All right. Let's start from the beginning. What inspired you to start writing The Angry Grammarian, and what drives your passion for grammar and language?
What got me started was reading other people writing about grammar and seeing how much fun how much fun they had with it, and B, how much fun I had reading it. There's an old maxim that says, write what you know. Because when you do, that applies to anything. When you're writing things that you care about, then your passion is going to come through the writing, and readers are going to pick up on that passion. And if you're interested in it, chances are somebody else out there is interested in it as well. I knew how into language I was, and there were a couple of times when I tried writing about language even before I had the column, and the response from readers was always huge. I could tell I wasn't the only one who was passionate about language. And so I said, you know what, I think there would be an audience for this if I decided that I wanted to write more regularly about grammar and about language and about punctuation.
Yeah, of course, punctuation is one of the, I don't know, one of the most serious issues that even the native speakers of the English language are battling with, are grappling with. You can hear a native speaker speaking very well, speaking fantastically, using beautiful language, beautiful words, and captivating phrases. But then when you ask that person to put their thoughts and ideas in writing, then you would, even like the non-native speakers of English from Africa and beyond, would be able to pinpoint some of their mistakes and problems. Take us through this problem of writing that has been bedeviling the native speakers, for example.
So, what you describe is a perfect example, and that actually, it makes me think of a colleague that I had in the first journalism job that I had when I was an editor.
Yeah.
I had a colleague's name was Jonathan. Jonathan was one of the best writers I've ever worked with. Just brilliant in coming up with a turn of phrase. He could pull a left field metaphor out of nowhere, and his writing, it just sang. There are pieces that he wrote literally 20 years ago that I can quote from memory verbatim, because the writing was just that good.
Excellent.
Now, also, I edited Jonathan, and he could be maddening to edit because he was so into the language that he didn't bother sometimes with things like punctuation. So, so it needed that cleanup, and that's great. Like, that is not a criticism of him at all. And that's why we have editors.
You're just citing him as an example, of course.
Yeah, it's not a criticism. As I said, he is one of the best writers I have ever worked with, and one of the most. His writing is just some of the most beautiful prose that I've ever had the pleasure of reading. But he needed a good editor, like all of us need a good editor. I need a good editor. I'm a really good writer. I'm a really clean writer, but I make mistakes too. I need people to edit my work too. So it's the best editors in the world are the ones who are invisible. You don't want to see the editor's work. And
they too can make mistakes. They too, the editor, can make mistakes.
Oh, sure.
They're humans.
Yes.
Yeah. Which one is more common among the native speakers of the English language? Is it in writing or in speaking that they tend to make mistakes?
I think probably speaking. Speaking, at least for myself, when I am writing, I sit and I ponder and I contemplate and I choose my words very carefully. If I'm speaking, it's much more off the cuff. I'm sure that I will make a grammatical mistake or two just in our conversation here today. And
how I wish I would pinpoint your grammatical errors.
Speaking, it happens off the cuff. It happens casually. Writing is a more deliberate activity for most people.
Is that problematic when you have a native speaker of the English language making grammatical mistakes when speaking? Because we, as non-native speakers, we're learning English right from school. We'll be taught rules and regulations governing the grammar of the English language. I will be taught to say this and not to say that. In fact, there is a book, or there are several books called, what's the name for that? Common Mistakes in English. And we'll be strictly taught on how to use one sentence or the other, how to use one tense or the other, or how to use one verb form or the other. But then when watching American films or listening to the music, or even listening to the American politicians, even the British ones, we find it that they tend to break some of those rules that we have been taught in class. So we find it kind of confusing and baffling and complicated, that which one should we take? The rules in the books or what the native speakers say when they're speaking? In this case, how can you address this confusion?
It's a funny problem, I think, because in a lot of examples, I think that you will find non-native speakers who speak more technically correctly than native speakers do, because as a native speaker, we learn colloquialisms. Let me give you an example. In Philadelphia, there is it's referred to as a regionalism, a word called use. So in the English language, the word you, Y-O-U, is used for the second person, both singular and plural. I can say you, just referring to one person, or I can say you, and I'm talking to a group of 50 people. Like, you folks there are the audience in this. Or you podcast listeners, you YouTube viewers, that is referring to many people, but it's the same as the singular you. There is, as I mentioned, a word that is used in Philadelphia and not too many other places. Use, Y-O-U-S-E. This is not standard English. But it is used. Use is used to refer to the second person plural. I might say use guys who are watching this video, or use people who are watching this video. That is not standard. You will not find that in any English rule book. But there are folks all over Philadelphia who speak that way. Across the state, in Pittsburgh, which is 300 miles away from here. I don't know how many kilometers that is.
The American is miles.
Yeah. But in Pittsburgh, the word is not use, but yins, YINZ. So, in Pittsburgh, you might hear people referring to like, hey, Yinz guys are going to the game today. In the American South, it's more commonly y'all, Y''ALL. And, so different parts of the country use different words to mean the same thing. None of them are standard. That doesn't technically mean that any of them are wrong. The way that people speak is constantly evolving. That means rules are constantly evolving. And so the way in which we codify how language is supposed to be spoken is constantly going to be changing.
I don't know. Yeah, the kind of picture you have painted is quite clear, and I really understand it. And I appreciate it. Which brings me to my next question, as in, if we are trying to learn, because here in Kano State, northern Nigeria, we have a couple of young people, a lot of young people who are so passionate about American English that they have formed several groups, I'm telling you, here in Kano, Americana this, Americana that, and so many of them are attaching their names to the names of American people, like Obama, for example, because he's a real hero here to many of the young people who are learning English language. So
here as well.
Yeah?
He's a hero to many here as well.
Oh, really? Later, I'm going to talk about American politics with you and see how you will be able to analyze. Then we'll talk about your affiliation to either Democrat or Republican, if you have any. But sticking to this issue of learn American English, what would you say to our students? I'm an English teacher. I think I told you that. What would you say to my students who are learning American English? That which type of American English should they learn? The Tupac Shakur's American English, Obama's American English, Mr. Trump's American English, or what? Or the American English that we have read in the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. Which one?
So it's interesting. There is no one American English. As you say, everybody speak. When everyone speaks, they make errors. But in any discipline, I think it is important to learn the rules so that you know how to break them. Learn the rules so that you know when you're allowed to break them. We're going to talk about music later. There are, a million rules for music. Like this is a major chord, this is a minor chord, this is a seventh chord, this is a diminished chord, etc. And when anyone is learning about music, they learn first what the rules are. Like, oh, a major chord has these 3 notes in it, a minor chord has these 3 notes in it, before they learn how to break those rules. And some of the greatest art in the world comes from breaking those rules. Miles Davis, as a jazz trumpeter, did not care what notes were in a major or minor chord, but he certainly learned what they were first, so that he could learn how to break those rules. The same is true of English. You learn what the rules are so that you can understand how to break them. To go back to the example we were talking about before, a word like use. Use is not standard, but if I'm walking around the streets of Philadelphia and I say the word use, most people are going to know exactly what I'm talking about because I'm in Philadelphia. And I might be adopting that non-standard Philadelphia English in order to fit in with other Philadelphians. If I go to Los Angeles on the other side of the country and I use the word use, people are going to be like, huh, what are you talking about? They may be able to figure it out from context, but they might not. So you need to know what that rule is so that you can know how to break it. I can break that rule in Philadelphia. I can't as easily break it in Los Angeles. Does that make sense?
Okay, so like you in the United States of America, do you tend to understand the variation of the American English? As in, when you are in LA, this is how you speak. When you are in Las Vegas, this is how you speak. When you are down south in Georgia or Alabama, this is how you speak. Is that how it works in the US?
Yes. Yeah, and the variations aren't so wild that you can't travel from one place to the other and not be understood. But there are certainly parts of the United States where this is just a much simpler example. Folks in New York speak much more quickly than folks in, I'll say Los Angeles, but even more than Los Angeles, like I would say like Montana or Idaho, somewhere like middle of the country. And I have absolutely, I grew up on the East Coast. I've lived my entire life basically on the East Coast of the United States. But I have absolutely heard folks from out West listen to folks from New York talk, and they're just talking so quickly that the folks from out West have to be like, slow down. I can't actually understand what it is that you're saying. And so, even differences as simple as that, where you're using the same words, but just speaking at different rates, it can be difficult for folks to understand. Whereas folks from the East Coast might listen to people from out West talking and be like, all right, come on, just speed it up, get it out already. I got places to be. I got things to do.
Because
stop talking so slowly.
Because a guy was telling me a story of another guy from Scotland who came to the United States of America speaking Scottish in his own Scottish accent, and then nobody was able to understand. What happened was that he met our own guy, he's from Nigeria, started complaining, raining down a lot of complaints that how on earth could I speak English and not be understood while the English language is from us? And it's like that, those guys. So this can happen, right?
Oh, yeah.
Even
you may have heard the expression that England and the United States are two countries divided by a common language.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say to our English students that are interested in learning American English? Which type of American English should they learn?
I think you learn the rules first, and then ideally immerse yourself in the culture, in people who speak it natively, so that you learn how to break those rules.
Yeah, definitely. So in your columns back in the early 2000s, I don't know, which sort of topics did you address apart from your major theme of the angry grammarian? Politics or way of life, or how politicians misuse English, or how teachers misuse English? What did you talk us through it?
So I would try and I had three sort of big topics that I like to cover in the column: grammar, language, and punctuation. And I roughly tried to do, about a third of the columns were about grammar, a third are about language, and a third are about punctuation. Punctuation ends up being probably getting the short end of the stick and getting a little less coverage than the other two. But I also enjoy using the column and using sort of the lens of grammar to talk about politics and to comment on politics, because but the whole point of the column is that how we say things and how we write things has a huge impact on how they affect our lives, and how, the ways that a law is written. Is a law, written very clearly so that it's very understandable what it says, or is it written really vaguely? There are many examples of laws that have been written vaguely, and so it's not clear what they say. And that's the point. That's what the lawmakers were trying to do, either because they were trying to hide the fact that they're doing something nefarious, or they want something to be so broad and sweeping that it's difficult to challenge it. And I want people to understand how folks are deliberately using and abusing language for these political aims.
All right. So let's talk about this issue. With you, why does bad grammar makes you angry? Because this is one question that you are asked on the BBC World Service. I don't know. Let's see if we can play it here.
Sure.
If you were an angry grammarian, what makes you angry? What makes me angry? I get angry when folks they don't use language correctly, but also when they're too precious about language. I think that there's a middle ground that one should take. And
all right, you've just heard yourself talking to Julian Walker of the BBC. Let me repeat the question. Why does bad grammar make you angry?
It's interesting. There was a study that came out. When did it come? I want to say it was just a few months ago. It might have been last year. Now, maybe it was like late last year that this study came out that found that.
Yeah, from the University of Birmingham, right?
Yes, this is the one.
I'm currently looking at one of the articles that you wrote about the topic.
Yeah, so this study found that when certain people encounter bad grammar, it actually activates something in their brain that is the same. It fires those same synapses as we encounter when we are under attack. If we're being chased by a tiger, and people have this sort of fight or flight response. But so I don't know that this is true of everybody, but for many of us, when we read bad grammar, it actually produces this physiological response in us, which I think goes a long way toward explaining why I am like I am.
So if you hear me misusing grammar, will you feel like shocked, for example?
No, for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a woman named Mary Norris. She is the copy chief of the New Yorker magazine, and she wrote a book called Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen. It's a great book, highly recommend it. And in it, she says that she tries really hard to not edit people unless they ask her to or unless paying her to. And I have, since I read that many years ago, I have tried to adopt that in my own life, that I try not to edit folks unless they ask me to, because otherwise I would be a pretty miserable human being constantly criticizing people.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that. And second, fortunately, I don't edit full time anymore. My job now entails other things. And because when I was editing full time, when it was my job to edit basically all day, every day, I was literally incapable of reading anything for pleasure because I couldn't read things without editing them.
Yes.
I would go through and read a sentence and be so focused on, is this written the best way that it possibly can be written, that I would forget to actually enjoy what I was reading. And so there were years when I barely read any books for pleasure, because I just couldn't. I had to just throw headphones on and escape in music at them for my enjoyment.
Yeah, definitely. Let me play to you what Donald Trump said when having a conversation, again, because I played it earlier, when having a fiery debate with Jim Acosta of CNN.
Person, the way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead.
The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. I'm not a native speaker of English, but I've been teaching English. We've been teaching.
You know that's wrong.
We've been teaching. I'm not mocking Mr. Trump. He's one of the favorite guys I've known. But we've been teaching students that when you say the way, definitely the verb has to be singular. What can you say about Mr. Trump's egregious mistake?
Well, I think it is egregious, it is wrong, and it is probably the least offensive thing that Donald Trump said that day, because most of the things that he says are wrong.
Yes, definitely. I know that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Let's now fast forward to, 2023 or 22 or after COVID. What gave you the inspiration to sort of make those articles, those columns into a musical? Yeah, talk about that.
Sure. Well, we don't have to fast forward too far, because I started working on it back in 2014, like 10 years ago. It took a while. It always takes a while.
Yeah.
And I had this idea that just like the column had a bigger audience than I think some folks would have expected, I had this idea, you know what, people really like musical theater, and there are lots of people who like grammar and language. I bet that there's an overlap here, because I'm one of those people, and so there are probably other people like me. And so I decided, you know what, I feel like writing a musical about grammar. So I started writing some songs on my own. Then I teamed up with a playwright. His name is David Lee White, and he and I worked on the story together. And then he wrote the script while I wrote the songs. So that he writes basically everything except the songs, all of the dialogue that comes between the songs, and then I write the songs themselves and their lyrics. And I would draw as inspiration topics that I had written about, particularly those things that got the biggest responses from readers. So, when I wrote about the Oxford comma, which in a series of three things, the Oxford comma is the comma that does or doesn't go before the word and. that got a huge response. And so I thought, all right, I need to have a column about the Oxford comma. When I wrote about how many spaces follow a period, whether it's one space, whether you type one space or two after a period, that got a huge response.
Wow.
And so, of course, I knew, all right, I need to write a column about how many spaces follow, or excuse me, I need to write a song about how many spaces follow a period.
Period, by a period, you mean full stop?
Full stop, yes. Excuse me, full stop.
No,
Yeah,
fine.
in the United States, we call it a period.
Sure.
Elsewhere, they call it a full stop. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So let me ask you, how many spaces do you put after a full stop?
I think one space.
You are correct.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's great. But
the thing is, it used to be two spaces. When everybody typed on typewriters, this was before computers came around, then typewriters used what is called a monospaced font. And what that means is that every letter, every character uses the exact same amount of space, whether it's a full stop or a comma or an exclamation point or a capital letter P or a capital letter M or a lowercase l or a lowercase I. Each of those characters takes the same amount of space. And so after a full stop, you needed to put two spaces in order to give the eye a break so that all the words don't just run together. Now nobody uses typewriters anymore, and computers, word processors, actually naturally put a little bit of extra space. The naked eye can't really measure it, but word processing programs put extra space after a full stop. And so you don't need to manually type in that extra space. But certainly anybody who learned how to type on a typewriter thinks that you need to put two spaces after a period. And many folks who learn to type after that think that you need two spaces after a period. And so it causes much consternation among many people. And so I thought, well, I certainly need to have a song about that. And then, the songs about just those classic grammatical dilemmas, those things that people get wrong, like using the word lie versus the word lay. And so I turned that into a romantic number called Lie With Me and Lay Me. Or people who confuse the words affect and effect. I made that into a song called The Effect of Your Affect. People who use apostrophes inappropriately, I made a song called Apostrophe Anarchy. Really just looking to have fun with language, to play with language. The goal is not for people to learn grammar. I wouldn't expect somebody to come to the show not knowing grammar and then walk out of it being like, I understand everything now. That's not the point. But rather the point is to have fun with grammar, to play with grammar. And hopefully when I play with it and when the actors play with it, then the audience can have fun playing as well.
Like I told you earlier before we started this recording, that musical theaters are not popular here in northern Nigeria, especially in Kano. Describe to us what you have done recently with your project, for example. How is the place organized? Is it like a stage drama where you have actors on the stage performing, for example, while people viewing at the same time in real life? How is it yours different from the stage drama that we've been familiar with, the traditional one?
Really, the biggest difference is that, yes, people are standing on stage, they're acting, there are actors, there's an audience, and from time to time, those actors break out into song. The idea behind a musical is that you heighten the emotion to the point where just speaking won't suffice in conveying what you need to convey. You need to sing about it, and sometimes dance about it too. So that is what musicals are all about. And I love musicals. I think that they're a tremendous form, probably my favorite form of entertainment. I think that they're a great way to tell stories. They're a really entertaining way to hear a story. And so I just enjoy contributing to that artistic medium.
Okay. So what sort of responses have you got from the audiences that have witnessed your musical, and those that have not witnessed but then followed you maybe on social media or heard from other people or heard on the radio or read it on newspaper? What sort of feedback have you got?
Responses have been great. Really, it's been gratifying to learn that I was right, that there is an audience for this and that people are interested in this and want to see it. I would sit off to the side. We had our inaugural run just 2 months ago now in March, and I would sit off to the side each night listening to what the audience responded to and how they responded to it, and scribbling down notes the whole time. And people had a really good time. They really enjoyed themselves. I also liked just sort of standing off to the side and listening to the conversations that people would be having as they walked out of the theater at the end or at the intermission, which is midway through the show, the break. And yeah, people responded really, really well. And we got a lot of comments online saying, I would love if this show comes to my city, please stage the show again. So actually we are going to be staging it again this fall. We're going to remount the show again here in Philadelphia, and then hopefully it will have a life beyond that.
Wow, definitely. So briefly, we have like 2-3 minutes to go. And I want to ask you like 3 questions. Let's briefly be as fast as possible. What was your role in the musical, for example? Were you part of the performers, or you just wrote it and allowed actors to act on it?
That's correct. Yeah, I wrote the songs. As I mentioned, my friend David wrote the script, and then we brought in actors who performed it.
Okay.
And there was also a live band that was playing, and then the director, music director, stage manager, lights, sound. There were a whole bunch of folks involved in the production.
Yeah, I put a question on my WhatsApp status asking people to tell me whether or not they think the native speakers do make mistakes when speaking or writing. Rukaya Alfazazi currently lives in Taiwan. We've done a lot of interviews with her. She speaks American English, even though she disputes that kind of fact. She says that absolutely all the time, you people make mistakes, especially Americans. That's what she said. I'm sure this is funny. This guy Usman bin Affan said mispronunciation. He has sort of understood that Americans. Is it true that you guys make mispronunciations or mispronounce words?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay, this guy says, of course, his name is Usman again. He says, of course they do, because I have experience of spotting many. So these guys have confirmed to me, as you have already confirmed to me, that native speakers of English do make mistakes. Final question from Hamza Basiru. He's a PhD student. He asked me to put this question to you, that educated native speakers, do they make mistakes? And if they do, is it intentional or just fashion or accidental?
It's a great question, and it's not one with an easy answer. Do native speakers make mistakes? Absolutely. Are they intentional? Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. Whether that is, the example that we talked about earlier of the word use. Sometimes people use that word because that's just what they grew up with. Sometimes they used it, as I mentioned, to fit in, because they know, hey, I'm in Philadelphia and this is a word that Philadelphians use, and so this is how I'm going to speak, even though it's not quote unquote proper English. Yeah. So yeah, people absolutely make mistakes. I would say they are more often unintentional than intentional, but you can 100% find examples of both.
Okay, I will not forget this from my auntie Antinabila Abdullahi, who also said, yes, they do make mistakes because they are also humans. They are not, nobody is perfect. Well, we have a lot to discuss, but unfortunately time is not by our side, and Jeff Barg is running to go and deal with a couple of other things. Your final words to me, to the show, and my English students.
No, my final words are just thank you. Love that you have a platform for folks to talk about language and to talk about English. And as I mentioned, it's great to learn the rules. It's also really great to break the rules and to understand how and why you do so. So thank you so much. Really appreciate having the conversation. Yeah,
you enjoyed my questions?
I did, absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeffrey Barg, for being on the show. And I hope when next we invite you, you'll be able to honor the invitation. I see you have generously done that.
Would love to someday.
Thank you very much indeed. On behalf of everyone that has contributed to the production of the show, my name is Omar Isa Dandago Abdul Rashid Hussein. He has contributed with his own laptop to do the interview. My name is Omar Isa Dandago, saying goodbye and see you very soon. Jeff, bye bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great one.
You're welcome, sir.
All right. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.